Family Mode.
Hello and welcome to another National Road Safety Partnership Program webinar. What will the cars of the future look like and what safety technology is on the horizon? So for those of you who don't know, my name is Jerome Carslake and I manage the National Road Safety Partnership Program and its many activities. If you want to find out more about the program and what I do, please check out our website and to register for a newsletter. So our structure for today is really what we're going to have is 60 minutes with plenty of times for discussion. So we're looking around 30 minutes, oh, bit of an error there. We're looking at 45 minutes plus 15 minutes for our session. And we may have a guest popping in partway through as well, if hopefully our audience don't mind. As with all of our webinars, we really love to have them as interactive as possible. So if you can please push any questions in there, I can ask them during the webinar. We also have several pause points through it. And James has informed me he's really keen for as many questions as possible. And now let's really move straight on in. Our presenter today is ANCAP's Chief Executive, James Goodwin. Welcome to you.
Good afternoon, welcome.
So for those of you who haven't heard of James, James is an experienced and dynamic executive and non-executive director with demonstrated history of working in the automotive, transport and safety industries. He's a skilled communicator with a background in media, communications and public affairs. So over to you, James.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for the interest in taking part in this webinar. And it's good to be in the new ARB facilities at Port Melbourne, excellent studios, and thanks for making it available. So really today's focus is on the future of ANCAP and the future of vehicles. And like Jerome said, happy to make it as interactive as possible, and we may have a guest appearance as well halfway through, but I'll let you know when that occurs. But it's important to look at the future. It's important to look at the past before we look at the future, and hopefully you can all see the slides and let us know if you can't. But going back only 20 years, let's have a look at the vehicles that we used to drive. And here's just a random selection of some of those vehicles. We can see that the A-pillars on the vehicles are compromised. The doors are coming off on some of them there. These weren't particularly bad cars in their day, but they are certainly not up to the sort of standards that we would expect today. And look at the death rate. The deaths per 100,000 in Australia at 10 deaths. Move forward to today, and we can see that the structural integrity of vehicles is almost as good as it can get. We're seeing the doors staying intact, the crumple zones are working, and that cabin is staying secure in protecting those occupants inside. We can see curtain airbags now becoming apparent. Even the Toyota Land Cruiser 70 series there, managing 5 stars. Even though it's quite a agricultural type vehicle there. So the results, look at the death rate. That hasn't also just completely come from vehicles, but we've now halved in that 20 years. So that's important. But how do we improve that even further? And that's the focus of today's discussion, is automation. And will that assist in reducing the road toll? And will that assist you as drivers? The crash scenarios that we do at ANCAP try to replicate as much as possible those real-world crashes and those real-world concerns. We're still conducting the physical crash test, as you would be aware, frontal offset test, the side impact test, the pole test, pedestrian assessment, whiplash. The full-width frontal test has been reintroduced, but importantly, we've done that to expand the family of dummies, as I describe it. In the full-width test, that we are having an adult female driving the vehicle and an adult female sits in the rear seat. So that is a change from having children in the frontal offset test, for instance. And what this is hoping to achieve is capturing more data about the community and how different people of different sizes respond during a physical crash test. And hopefully that will feed back into better and safer vehicles. But what we're concentrating on today are the safety assistance technologies, those automated technologies that will hopefully help you avoid having a crash in the first place. So we've got speed and traffic sign recognition, autonomous emergency braking and lane support systems. And we will look at our the way we display our assessment now. We're using 4 pillars that makes it quite clear that we're looking at adult occupant protection, child protection, pedestrian, and then the safety assist. That is how we're presenting things now, and you'll see that there is automation across all those areas. if you don't have any level of automation in a vehicle in 2018, you are not eligible for a 5-star safety rating. So we're moving forward. We feel that automation is the key, and it is here. Now, it's not to take over the role of the driver. It's there to assist you. I describe it as another pair of eyes to help you do the driving, and that's what we're looking at. Now, the automation is here, but very few people have actually experienced it, and that's an important point. ANCAP is here to help you understand it and to help you experience it so that you know that through our testing, importantly, that just having the technology isn't good enough. It actually has to work, and that's what ANCAP testing is doing.
But what does it mean for the 5-star of the past? Like, you mentioned automation is part of the future. What does that mean for like 4 or 5 years ago, like 5-star ANCAP?
Yeah, very important point. So that's where we look at the date stamp. So look at the year that the vehicle was tested. We're not saying that a 5-star vehicle from 5 or 10 years ago is unsafe. It's just been tested to different protocols. And people should look at the same cohort of vehicles. So our advice is look for a 5-star vehicle with a tested year no more than 3 years old. And that way you know you are looking at a vehicle and choosing a vehicle that has been tested to the safest possible, or the latest scenarios, and is as safe as possible. On the screen, we're looking at a snapshot of autonomous emergency braking testing. We can see a vehicle, a silver vehicle, and it's approaching, I sometimes describe it as a blow-up vehicle. It looks like it's people have been there blowing it up all morning, but it's made with it's Velcro and very strong fabric, and it's on a platform, and it travels along the road, and then the vehicle is obviously trying to stop unaided by the driver. And why is it like that? It's because it doesn't always work. And then the vehicle, if it doesn't work, it can go over the top of it, and it can be quite dramatic to actually see that. But fortunately, this one worked here. And autonomous emergency braking, we've got different scenarios, and we'll show a video on that in a moment. But we're also testing lane support systems. On the screen, you can see the tarmac there with multiple scenarios that are mapped out there. We've got broken lines, unbroken lines, but importantly, we also look at the edge of the road. That's particularly important in Australia, where a lot of particularly country roads won't have a left line marking, and many vehicles will be able to identify the edge of the road, and that's what we also test as well.
So whereabouts is that testing taking place, James?
So that one was actually in the United Kingdom, so that's at Thatcham Research. And it's a frustration of mine that we're not able to undertake this testing to the ANCAP protocol here in Australia. We'd really like to be able to, but at the moment we're sending vehicles overseas. So we're sending vehicles to England, to Spain, and to France. And one of the reasons we're here at ARB today is to have some further discussions on trying to have a working test facility in Australia in a laboratory, because these are the building blocks to full automation. We're only talking about a snapshot of some of those systems that will be the drivers and the building blocks for full automation.
And I guess just a question on that. With regards, how much does the technology vary between vehicles? And I've got a question here from Andrew saying, what is the speed at which AEB ceases to be effective? Is that the same on every vehicle, or does it vary, or does it depend on what I can pay?
Yeah, they're all different. And this is where it's important that people understand the sort of system that they have in their vehicle. We describe 3 sorts of AEB. AEB City is generally from about 5 kilometres an hour up to about 40 kilometres an hour. Some could be a bit different, but that's about a standard. And then we've got high speed or interurban AEB, which is up to those highway speeds. And then there's vulnerable road user, and that's where it can identify potentially a cyclist, but also a pedestrian, and that's what that scenario is looking at. So it's important to understand what your vehicle has. AEB City and AEB Highway, as I describe it, are only identifying another vehicle. So they may not identify a person. AEB vulnerable road user, though, is calibrated to identify a pedestrian, and that's an important point.
And what about if I go bush?
Yes, well, no problem, really. It should work. It should work on whatever road you're looking at. So no problem. We also do testing at night time as well. I think that the question we always get is, will it identify that kangaroo? And we were discussing that just before the webinar. Look, it probably will, but kangaroos are creating a problem for vehicle manufacturers and the people who are designing this new technology, because the kangaroo hops. If the kangaroo is standing in the middle of the road, and if you have AEB vulnerable road user, it will no doubt identify that. But if the kangaroo starts hopping away, it's potentially the computer system goes, well, there's nothing touching the ground anymore, so the threat has disappeared.
So the old adage, computer says no.
Exactly. But what it will do is hopefully it will have already been applying the brakes, and even if it doesn't come to a complete stop, then you're likely to have reduced the severity of the crash. So I think the last point on this is how do we also make these systems work on a day-to-day basis? And one of those features is speed and traffic sign recognition. How often do we drive along the road and we think, what is the speed limit here? I mean, that's an important point for just obeying the law and avoiding those speeding fines, but it's also the building blocks for full automation. If your car is going to be automated, it's going to have to understand what the speed zone is, and including those recommended speed zones like turning a corner and so on. And we understand there are some problems with identifying some systems like when a speed sign is listed on a yellow background as opposed to a white background. So we're working with the vehicle manufacturers on that to calibrate the systems. But we also need to talk to the infrastructure providers. With the research we're getting from our testing and assessment, we're going to feed that back into the infrastructure providers, the state governments, the toll road operators and so on. And hopefully we can then have a system, a safe system, where we've got the infrastructure that helps the vehicle, but also the vehicle can identify those obvious speed and traffic sign that we see on the road. Look, the best way to describe it is actually see it. So what we're going to show is a video. The video is from a recent test that we conducted on the new Toyota Corolla, the 2018 Toyota Corolla. There's going to be no audio. I can't speak to you when we play the video. So the things to look for is you'll see the AEB at all levels being tested. So we've got the city approaching the vehicle. We're looking at pedestrian. We're looking at cyclist, which is brand new for Australia and Europe this year. And it's also undertaking lane support system testing as well. So that's what to look for. And I think you'll also be impressed that this is a vehicle that's really only about $25,000. And you could argue that it's level 1 or level 2 automation. So we might play the video now.
Let's get it on.
Well, thanks for that. Hopefully everybody could see that.
Yeah, and I just really want to highlight, I guess, the key thing that hit me there is, once again, you're taking vehicles all the way over to the UK and testing Australian vehicles over there to our sort of things, and unable to do that here.
That's right. And in fact, that one was in Spain. So that's what we need to do that. And we need to do it right. We need to make sure we're doing it right. Yeah.
And perfect timing here. We've actually just had a special guest come on in. Our Deputy Prime Minister, Michael McCormack, has come in. So welcome.
Great to be here. Welcome, Deputy Prime Minister.
We're just going to pass him over. So bear with us, everyone. I hope you don't mind. We actually happen to have our launch going on for our new Port Melbourne office in ARB, so we have the Deputy Prime Minister launching it.
Good. Well, thanks, Deputy Prime Minister. We've just been talking about new autonomous technologies, autonomous emergency braking and technology like that. I think perhaps a question, perhaps. Do you see a time where we might see a full driverless future?
Well, look, it's from what I've seen today, it's not too far away in one sense, but in another sense, we've got to get the regulatory processes in place. But the technology that is already out there, and the safety mechanisms by which companies are investing a lot of money, it is the way of the future. It's almost George Jetson type stuff, but it's not too far away.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that's what we're hoping to do with the ANCAP testing, is to provide that confidence to people that the testing of this technology will give them that confidence that that's what they want in the vehicle, and also for the car brands to actually be offering it. And
well, ANCAP's going to play a vital role in that, and that's why the federal government has invested as well an additional $6.64 million into ANCAP, and what you do and how you do it is going to help the future, not just technologies, but indeed the buying decisions that customers right around our nation have. But you do a wonderful job, I know, heading up that organisation, but the organisation itself is front and centre of road safety, front and centre of the future, really.
Good, appreciate that very much. We were just talking about kangaroos before and the problems they face both on the road and for car manufacturers at the moment. And that's something that we often say it's a global car market and a global industry, but sometimes...
A uniquely Australian problem, and given the drought, there are more kangaroos on the side of the road than I have ever seen before. I come from a farm. My neighbour told me the other day, he asked me how many kangaroos I'd seen on our property in all the years of growing up there. Only one, and it was on the neighbour's property. These days I drive past the old farm and I see a lot of kangaroos on the side of the road. So they are in plague proportions. The drought has only made them search further and farther for water, and ending up, unfortunately, on our roads and in our way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we can't fix the drought, but we certainly hope that ends soon, and appreciate the government support for our farmers.
Indeed. Oh, great to join you online. It's fantastic. So how many people are also joining us online today?
We're talking to 62 people at the moment.
Oh, very good.
It's been made available to people. It's being recorded, and more people will come through. We've got some tricky questions coming through, so we'll start working through some of those as well.
Well, you've got the right man in James Goodwin to do just that.
Good. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Yeah. So we'll continue on the presentation as we were proposing. So look, a great interruption, but
we never know who pops up. And I think whilst we're on this, Andrew's sort of question is, why can't it be done down at sort of like the Anglesey sort of facility?
Well, it can be, except that Anglesey is not a laboratory. So what we need is we need both a facility, and we also need a laboratory who can undertake that testing for us on a contractual basis. So certainly the facility at Anglesey is very good. It would need some probably quite minor upgrades to that. But what the Anglesey facility isn't is a testing laboratory, and so that's where we need a partnership between testing laboratories, a facility, and ANCAP.
Fantastic. One question here, just before you sort of move on. Does ANCAP consider SAS to be camera-based, map data-based, or both? And are they judged independently? Thank you, Yasmin.
Yeah, that's a good question, Yasmin. We're really technology neutral. We don't mind, we want to promote innovation. So we don't want to tell car manufacturers what sort of technology they should be using. What we're doing is giving them a protocol that they need to meet, a performance target that they should be meeting there. So it needs to be car-based, and a lot of the map-based systems are not necessarily coming from the vehicle. They could be through another, say, app, you'd say from Google or something like that. So that's all we say, that we are testing the vehicle. We're not necessarily testing some of the add-ons that you might be able to use with the vehicle. But we don't mind if it's camera-based, radar-based, LiDAR, whatever, as long as it works. That's what we're looking at. There's a question about the availability of vehicles with this sort of technology. there's been a sharp rise in the vehicles with autonomous emergency braking, partly because the manufacturers knew that the new testing protocols were coming into place in 2018. So there's been a massive increase, but we're still falling behind. Out of the top 100 selling vehicles in Australia, 31% of them have AEB as standard equipment. So that's quite good. It's come up from 3% only 2.5 years ago. But unfortunately, a third still don't even have it available as an option, but hopefully that will change soon. The other question we always get is how effective is it? And certainly the studies that we have show that there's a good chance of reducing real-world crashes with an effective AEB system. So our research with ANCAP highlighted a 38% reduction in real-world rear-end crashes. So that's a very, very good result. And that was from a number of years ago. So the technology has advanced further on since then. So happy to take any more questions. Yeah.
So for a fleet, you think for a fleet company then, it's a pretty good incentive if you have maybe pay a little bit more for a vehicle with AEB.
Yes. The
risk of rear-ending is gone.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the return on investment there for the fleet buyers watching and listening, absolutely. Potentially, you may not even be paying any extra for a vehicle to get this technology as standard. So look around. And there's a bargaining point as well for fleet buyers that this is likely to improve productivity. It's likely to reduce injuries and any compensation type claims. So whichever way you look at it, this is a good thing. And for all those people who say, look, I'm a good driver, I don't need it. Well, that's fine, but the person who goes through the red light or the person who goes through that stop sign, they're not a good driver. So having more vehicles in the fleet with this sort of technology is actually better for the community.
Excellent. We've got some good questions here. Got one here from Neil. How safe is safe for a car of the future?
Yeah, well, that's a good point. We say that we need to concentrate on some of these immediate technologies before we go too far. Let's not lose confidence in the technologies. Let's make sure that they are effective and that people understand the limitations. We're not talking about driverless technology here. We're talking about some features that have some automated technology that I describe as an extra pair of eyes for you. They're not taking over the driving. They're coming in during emergency situations or a situation where the vehicle or the computer, the technology in the vehicle might feel that, hey, you're not driving as good or as safely as you should be, so the vehicle intervenes. That can't be a bad thing as long as it works effectively, and that's what our testing is aiming to do. So importantly, you don't get points just for having this technology. We actually undertake the testing and the assessment to make sure this technology is working.
A question here from John. He wants to know, what is the research basis for introducing the proposed safety technology?
So the new protocols have been planned for a number of years, and this has been coming about really because certainly the structural integrity of vehicles is now about as best as you can. Okay, there are a few outliers with perhaps some new entrants to the market, but the next step is how do we start avoiding crashes in the first place, and that's really where the research told us that we needed to go. That the next wave of aiming to reduce the road toll and serious injuries is to start looking at the technologies that will help us avoiding the crash in the first place. I mean, we did start that 10 years or so ago with things like electronic stability control. Remember, there was discussion 10, 15 years ago, is like, well, we need to stop these rollovers. SUVs, higher riding dual cab utes, for instance, rollovers became a problem. But rather than looking at things like a roof crush test and so on, what we wanted to do was actually avoid having that crash in the first place, and electronic stability control was one of those answers. So really, that's the start of the building blocks for where we're at the moment to push the boundaries. Interesting that only a couple of years ago, when we were proposing these 2018 testing protocols, all the car brands said, look, it can't be done, it's too hard. We won't be able to achieve it. What are you going to do when there's more 3-star cars on the road and so on? but look at the results. We're already getting some vehicles. We've got Mazdas, Toyotas, and so on, already achieving 5-star results with this technology, this automated technology, being achieved this year. So that tells me that the industry is responding.
What drives the market forces for that? Are you relying on purely market, or and that's a good question here from Matthew, is how much of this should be legislated rather than letting them choose?
We always say that we're complementary to regulation, and what we try to do there is regulation is good, but when regulation is not as flexible as what ANCAP can be. We know that there's lots of work being done on allowing driverless or automated vehicles, but we're talking about a timeline there that governments wouldn't even be ready until about 2020 to be able to consider that. ANCAP's saying in 2018, if you don't have any automation, you're not eligible for 5 stars. So we're much more flexible. We can also test that marketplace as well and see how consumers are responding and seeing how vehicle brands are responding. So regulation usually captures the areas that the market forces don't. So when you look at the example I used, electronic stability control, by the time it became regulation, through ANCAP promoting that and the brands responding, then almost 80% of the vehicle fleet already had stability control fitted. But regulation closed that gap that was really not going to be able to be done, not be able to be closed just through market forces. So that's where we're complementary, and we stay in contact with that. Interestingly, from a regulation point of view, is that the Australian government is certainly looking at autonomous emergency braking for heavy vehicles before the passenger car fleet. So we're monitoring and watching that to see how that plays its part.
I think we'll move on, but just as we do, I'll combine 2 questions here from Andrew and Clarence. Does any vehicle with AEB get 5-star safety rating now? And the videos show the weather testing of AEB in clear weather. What about wet weather and nighttime?
Yes, so nighttime, absolutely. There are, at the moment, the protocols are not using different weather conditions. I mean, look, different weather conditions would depend on the day, but there are certain requirements that are required for things like wind and so on, but that's more to make sure that the dummies don't, blow over and so on. Look, that's the next step. But like we said, we have to start somewhere, and these are the building blocks to move forward. Certainly, the next protocols will be looking at different conditions, but it's great to see that we've got different line markings and also different, we've got day and night time for all those different scenarios, and not just looking at line markings, we're also looking at the edge of road and so on. So that's what we're looking at there. Different weather conditions, that's being researched and trialled, but at the moment is not part of the actual official protocol at the moment. Awesome.
Let's move it on, I think.
Well, so what will the car of the future look like? We've started discussing some of the early technologies, but look, my argument is that the car of the future is probably going to look very much like the car you're driving today. But what it will have is more automation that will be an extra pair of eyes for you, but will also hopefully intervene if something happens. It may also be able to take over some of those more mundane forms of driving, like if you're in a traffic jam or if you're on a highway on cruise control. That's the level of automation that and the car of the future that I see, certainly in Australia. I know I sort of had a question the other week from someone. Is like, well, what automated vehicle is going to launch the boat at the weekend for me? Well, we know that's not going to happen. So that's why having a vehicle that can launch a boat, but may have some autonomous features as well, is likely to be the future scenario for the everyday driver here in Australia. But full driverless vehicles are probably for those other areas. So a bus and public transport options, moving people around cities, congested areas, airports, university campuses, and so on. That's where I see the full autonomous vehicles are likely to be and to be effective as well. Our aim through this is to provide confidence. It's all about confidence. We are a consumer advocate first and foremost, so we want to provide consumers with the confidence that they should want this technology and that they will know it will work and they will know it will work through our testing. We want the vehicle brands to offer the technology and that they know that they will be rewarded through our testing process if they offer it. And we're also there to assist and provide confidence to the regulators, that they know that through our testing and through our feedback with consumers, that they are comfortable that either the current regulations are fine and sufficient, or that they may need to make adjustments. So that's what we're aiming for. Really, the next slide is, I probably mentioned that before. I mean, will we see this full autonomous future? I see, and what I think we should be concentrating on at the moment are really those driverless type things, driverless buses and so on, are really for very closed circuit type areas. They're not replacing the everyday car at the moment. What we're looking at here is trying to get some level of automation into those everyday vehicles that will help you and take away some of the stress of the driving. But it's also important to note that crashworthiness is important. I've made some criticisms in the past of some of the technology companies offering these driverless cars, and you look at them, they don't have any. They have planned to be mixing on the road with vehicles, with buses, with trucks, and yet they don't have airbags, they don't have side intrusion bars, they don't have any of those normal structural protections that we would expect on a modern day car today. So the very real risk of someone in a pod-like vehicle is that somebody else runs into them. So if you're a passenger in one of those vehicles, you would want to be as safe as you would be in a normal car. So I say in a mixed fleet, structural integrity and crashworthiness is critical, no matter what you're in.
I hadn't thought of it that way at all. I think very much, so the only way they could really work is total segregation.
Absolutely, and that's not practical either, and is not a solution that we want. So I think that's where we need to understand that they will be mixing, and they should be mixing, and the vehicles should be safe, because we're all, whether we're a driver or whether we're a passenger, you want to be as safe as you can be. So what do we look for in the future? There's a timeline there just pointing out some of the next technologies. What's around the corner? This is moving quite fast. We're still concentrating on structural integrity as well and making some changes to that. We've got more advanced dummies, and we're making those tests a little harder as well, some of those traditional tests. But things like AEB in reverse, junction assist, intersection assistance, where it can actually tell if another vehicle is going through that stop sign or the red light, and we'll be able to take action for those sorts of scenarios. Things like automatic emergency steering, that if you're swerving to avoid something on the road, that the computer may be able to do that better and quicker. That's the sort of technology that we're looking at as well to help you get out of that get out of that situation. So that's some of the technologies on the horizon. But what to look for, and particularly for the fleet buyers and so on the line, you don't need to do anything different. You're doing this well anyway. You're looking for 5-star vehicles, you're buying 5-star vehicles, but we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Look for the date stamp, and the newer date stamp is what you should be looking for. I'd say don't buy a vehicle that has a date stamp more than 3 years old. And you can see on the timeline there, that's just a moving purchasing range. If the vehicle that you're after is outside of that range, then perhaps look again. We know that in some segments, like the light commercial market, there could be some fewer options, but still apply the same principle. Choose the latest date stamp that you can get. So that's what we're trying to do there. You've been doing it well, and appreciate everybody's support. That's the influence. We don't make cars, but what we do have is buying influence, and certainly the large fleet buyers really can influence the marketplace. We know that car brands are now undertaking new testing processes in order to update their date stamp. They already have a 5-star vehicle, but adding that extra pressure by saying that you shouldn't have a date stamp more than 3 years old means that vehicle brands are now coming to us and asking for their date stamp to be reviewed and upgraded. And if they have improved the technology, then they should be rewarded for that as well.
Great, and I'll tell you, there's no shortage of questions coming in, mate.
That's excellent.
So a question here from Andrew, and then I'll feed on to one from Keith. Will smartphone blocking technology become commonplace one day, do you think?
Well, I think that's a good situation. But also we need to look at that more holistically. Do we need to block the smartphone, or if the smartphone can be used through the technology in the vehicle, is that actually another scenario that we could be using as well? For instance, voice to text, for instance. If that means that somebody can still be connected, is that a better scenario than completely blocking the person from being able to use their phone? I don't know the answer on that, but I think what we need to understand is people want to be connected. So we need to make sure that the way that they are connected is as safe as it can be. And that's what we need to be looking at. There's some interesting new technology coming in now. For instance, it's a little bit off topic, but just demonstrating the connectivity and how connectivity is not necessarily a bad thing. It's in our future roadmap, identifying if a child in particular has been left in a vehicle. New vehicles, and there's one on the market right now, can actually do that. And then they will notify the driver or the owner of the vehicle that somebody's been left in the car. We know that from the road patrols, the motoring clubs, I mean, they do thousands of calls to get children out of locked cars, for instance. So connectivity is not necessarily a bad thing, but I take your point that we need to look at the ways that it is actually useful and is safe for everyone.
That's great. And I guess just drawing on that a little bit further, looking from a different angle, is ANCAP looking at attention, distraction monitoring or fatigue monitoring systems? Just from Keith.
So we're not looking directly at that. ANCAP, that's not in the ANCAP protocol at the moment, but look, we're certainly part of the road safety space and happy to see research and take part in any research on those sorts of things at the moment. Where we're concentrating on our research to guide the next protocols at the moment is human-machine interface. That could have a fatigue element, but really we're looking at, with all this new technology, we actually want people to use it. We don't want people to be scared of it. So that's what we're concentrating on at the moment. Could have a fatigue element, but no, ANCAP's not actively working on any fatigue management issues at the moment.
And there's a really good question here from Daniel. So what tips have you for smaller fleets that might like to invest in emerging autonomous technologies but can't afford to in the short term? So is this something just for big fleets?
No, not at all. And in some ways, smaller fleets could have a better opportunity. You can pick and choose. Large fleets tend to like a bit of a template model, don't they? That it's we need 100 vehicles, so we're going to get 100 of those white sedans and 50 of the white utes. Smaller fleets can actually mix and match. Perhaps having, if you need 3 vehicles, perhaps getting one from different manufacturers and seeing how they work, seeing how the staff respond. That human-machine interface idea as well is important. Perhaps the feedback could be that, oh, gee, that vehicle is much better, and the autonomous emergency braking system on that one worked, but it didn't work on the other one. Those sorts of things. The lane support system is actually really helpful on one model, but not on the other. That actually is really good feedback, and something that smaller fleets have the greater flexibility to be able to do that. So I say don't be concerned by that. But I'd say certainly the larger fleets have the influence to be able to say, hey, we want this, and that's good for everyone. But don't be scared off. This technology is now in some quite affordable vehicles. We saw that with the Toyota Corolla example. One segment that's probably just letting it slip a little bit is the light commercial vehicles, but they're racing pretty quickly. We're now seeing vans with autonomous emergency braking. We're now seeing utes with autonomous emergency braking and lane support systems and adaptive cruise control. So it won't take long before the light commercial segment catches up.
And this is a really good question here from Ron, I guess, drawing on that sensitivity. So with the AV, the AEB, what happens if the vehicle's going too slow? Can they still have a smash if it's too sensitive or not sensitive enough?
Yes. A few people who have actually bought a new vehicle with autonomous emergency braking have been reporting things like, oh, I was in a traffic jam and I nudged the car in front of me. Well, it's probably because they were just creeping forward. The car may have only been doing about 2 kilometres an hour. So, look, that hasn't, so yes, you may have still had a little nose to tail incident, but it was no catastrophic crash. No one was hurt, no one died, etc. So that's important about being aware of the technology you've got. But really, the car needs to be moving and properly moving for braking to work. So I think those examples highlight that the driver is still in control. You know, think of it as like the pilot. The pilot, whether he's on autopilot or not, is still in charge. He's the captain, and that might be a new way that we need to start thinking about when we get behind the wheel. You're really the captain of that that vehicle, and you are monitoring those systems and need to take over when you can. I mean, look a funny story, a personal story. You know, my car it's got a lot of this technology, and I was driving along the other weekend, and this error message came up on the dashboard, and I thought, gee, this is quite catastrophic. It's saying that all these autonomous features are now unavailable. You may continue driving, but this system needs to be fixed. And there was a screenshot on the dashboard had come up saying there's a problem, and it was identifying where the grille is on the front of the car. So I pull over as soon as I could, and expecting the worst. But what had happened is a giant leaf had got itself stuck to the front sensor of the car. And I thought, well, what's going to stop autonomous driving? And that could be windy days and big leaves. But I could still keep driving because I'm a driver. But if the car was driving itself, that leaf would have absolutely stopped that vehicle from moving any further. So, look, it's a funny anecdote, but it also highlights we've got a long way to go. But it also shows, and it said to me, gee, I don't know if I want to keep driving this car without these systems working, because I'd gotten so used to having that support from the vehicle.
Do you have any plans for electric vehicle testing over here?
So we have a number of electric vehicles have ANCAP ratings. We don't consider the drivetrain any different. So whether it's petrol, diesel or electric, we still test the vehicle. The only thing is that with an electric vehicle, we sometimes may have to undertake another suite of tests. So for instance, if one model has both a petrol and an electric motor, we won't be able to extend the rating automatically from the petrol model. We would have to undertake a full suite of testing on the electric vehicle. So plenty of lists. I think there'd be close to almost 10 electric vehicles that currently have ANCAP ratings and 5-star ratings at the moment. Interestingly, New Zealand's doing better than Australia. They have more 5-star electric vehicles on sale than what Australia has.
What about the driver skill as well? Do you think as people go along and there's more autonomous technology coming in, what happens if someone gets out of that vehicle into an older vehicle? Well,
it's just the reality, isn't it? And we see that even now, where you get used to things. That's something that I think will change over time. We're getting more and more technology evolving into the fleet, so it's probably going to be a transition period. But it is something for people to be conscious of, that you need to get your surroundings and you need to understand the capabilities of the vehicle you're driving.
So a question here from Matthew, always a big concern as well. Do you see cybersecurity as a future problem for vehicles?
Absolutely it is, but it's something a little bit outside our area of expertise at the moment. But a lot of the technologies, though, that these vehicles have, and you use that Corolla example, the car is not necessarily connected. So those systems are working within the vehicle. Something like a Tesla, for instance, things can be changed, things can be done over the air. So that is a connected car. So connected and autonomous don't necessarily go together, but certainly for those connected vehicles, that can be a risk. And it's important that, look, the car brands, no doubt, are very aware of this. They do not want their customer to be, or their vehicle to be stranded or compromised. So they are certainly working on those sorts of matters.
Excellent. I think we'll move on to the next slide. Thank you, James.
Good. Well, look, stay informed. This was really a snapshot of where we've been, where we're going, giving you an update on the technologies that ANCAP is testing at the moment. Also, perhaps to reinforce, look, don't be scared of it. Look for this technology. I like the question about small fleets. Look, do it if you've got the option to perhaps trial a vehicle with this sort of technology. Then do it. You may not have to pay any extra for it. So stay informed. We've got an app, a free app. You can download that. That gives you all the current ratings. It also has a crash log if unfortunately you are involved in a crash, and you can sign up for our newsletters and all those sorts of things. So that's what I'd say, and happy to stay informed. Send us any questions if you wish via email. We're happy to help.
It's fantastic. So we're now going to move in. We've got quite a few questions to go through as well. So which one should we delve into? Here we go. How about latency? You mentioned around the connectivity and the technology of the child in the car. Question here is 5G absolutely necessary for this sort of technology in the future?
Look, that's a little bit outside my area of expertise to be able to answer on that. Certainly, I know that many vehicles have are connected. They do actually have essentially a wireless and a Wi-Fi network of their own. I'm not sure that with the technologies that we're testing now and the technology in the car now, that's needed. And remember, we've got an old fleet, so we're going to have a mixed fleet for quite some time. But understanding that that we're going to have to reserve. Well, I'll take a step back. For too long, politicians and people who control the infrastructure that we drive on have thought that laying some tarmac on the road is the roadway. But in the future, when we do have technology that enables vehicles to talk to each other and that can identify GPS down to what lane it is in, that's going to need much more bandwidth and a dedicated band. And I'm not sure that governments have been proactive enough in future-proofing that. But that is going to be what we need to get to this period where the cars can actually talk to each other.
Great. Question here from David. From Neil. How can AV and non-AVs help achieve Vision Zero in the future?
Yes. We understand that there is going to be a mixed fleet. Everyone says they're a good driver, and most people are most of the time, but we know that we all make mistakes. It should just be that mistake shouldn't be a fatal mistake or a serious injury type mistake. There is always going to be some level of crashes that we may not be able to avoid. You know, driving on a country road, a kangaroo comes out, there's black ice, all of those sorts of things. But hopefully, with the right systems in place, that will not be a serious crash. The important thing with a mixed fleet of autonomous, semi-autonomous and non-autonomous vehicles is that they need to be able to interrelate with each other. And that's going to be also an important element for people driving non-autonomous vehicles. The autonomous vehicle, for instance, or even a semi-autonomous one, it may never go through an amber light. It certainly won't go through a red light. It may not speed. But you know what? People do those sorts of things. So we're going to actually have to learn how to respond to those different scenarios on the road.
Great. Got a question here from Daniel. On a world scale, where does Australia sit in terms of implementing autonomous vehicle technology standards? And what regions are leading the way to make this a priority?
We're doing well, but where we're probably just falling behind is some of the basic levels of automation are not really going through the full fleet. Australia's doing well with some of those high-end vehicles that are very autonomous. Level 2, potentially even level 3. That's fine. We allow them on the road, and there's no problem with that. So that's very good that we're quite innovative. But what we haven't got are really dedicated policies and priorities at government levels, at business levels, that have actually said, you know what, let's do this, let's make this, and let's be the leader on this. When you look at Sweden, for instance, having proper trials where customers of Volvos can actually drive autonomously on certain roads, that is leadership. There are controls on that, but that's probably where Australia has not done that as effectively as other countries. We've not actually said, you know what, we actually want to be a leader on this, and how are we going to get there?
Great. And David has a question here. There's a slide that specifies what ANCAP plans to introduce and when, and that's helpful, but it suggests that vehicle brands will only have a year to develop and implement technology before testing smarts. Is that correct? Or will vehicle brands be given more advance notice than that?
Well, the timeline presents when it will be implemented for assessment. Most of this technology, almost every technology on that screen, is already on some vehicles right now. But we know that it's not across all the vehicles. So that's what we're aiming to do, is a staged implementation of rollout of this assessment. But the vehicle brands are very aware of the forthcoming, both the published and the non-published protocols and what the game plan is. Just like everything we've done over the past 25 years, the car brands say, no, can't be done. No. Who wants airbags? Who wants seatbelts? Who wants seatbelt pretensioners? They've said no, can't be done, too expensive. But you know what? They've done it, and I think it's a good example with the technologies that have been introduced this year. Finding a vehicle without some of those automated features will start to become difficult. And that's a good thing. So look, we talk to the vehicle brands very regularly. So does Europe. So look, don't be worried that. And look, I wouldn't have a whole lot of empathy sympathy for the vehicle brands. They know what's coming, and they should be doing what's best for the customer. The real concern is when the car brands say, you know what, we'll offer that for one market, but we won't offer it for another market, and that's what really gets me going. Is yes, we'll offer that for Europe, or we'll offer that for Australia, but you know what, we'll actually take all of that off and we'll sell that same vehicle in Southeast Asia or so on. We should expect the same level of safety and the same level of technology because we're all humans.
That's good. That's a really great, powerful point. Question here from Andrew, talking about those sort of things. What's the best way to educate parents about buying the safest cars for their kids to drive?
Yes. The technology is changing, and the new drivers are actually going to have to get used to this new technology as well. It may mean that in the future, driving tests have to start changing. But the important thing is that you get in the safest car that you can afford. I don't expect that everyone's going to go out and buy a car with autonomous features. They can't. But our argument is also about affordability and improving affordability. You shouldn't have to pay extra for automated safety features. Sure, pay extra for some features that might just make your lifestyle a little easier. But things like autonomous emergency braking and so on, that's not a luxury. That is a life-saving feature. So look, I always say safest car that you can afford, whether that's new or used, and or safest car in the driveway. Perhaps mum and dad should drive the older car and let the P-plater drive the safer car in the driveway. That's one way of not necessarily spending any money, but what you're doing is mitigating that risk. We know that too often the the most vulnerable road users, the older drivers and the younger drivers, are usually in the oldest vehicles on the road. So we need to look at changing that approach.
Do you think parents understand that?
I don't think they do. I think too many people say, well, I wouldn't let my son or daughter drive my new car because I've just paid $30,000, $40,000 for it. But you have to turn that around and say, well, what's the value that you place on your son or daughter? If potentially the difference with what vehicle they're driving could actually mean life or death, that's the question that I would pose to people is, what's the value on your son or daughter?
And I guess just a personal question for me, being a country boy, do you think there's sort of certain cars that are probably better for country conditions at all with some of this new technology coming on?
There obviously will be, but it's hard to say. Look, we have to be a one-size-fits-all sort of approach with our testing, but that's also where it's important that people do test drive vehicles in the environment that they drive in. Going to the city, buying a new car, going home, and it not working, or it's being confused by something on the farm, is not going to work for you. I mean, we had I joke, but there was a farmer who called our office. He bought this new car with autonomous emergency braking, and he was driving up the driveway of the farm, and all the cows were over the driveway, and he couldn't get through. The autonomous emergency braking kept saying, no, there's an obstruction. So he kept putting his foot down, and the car would brake suddenly, and the cows wouldn't move. And so he phoned up and he says, I want a refund because I can't even get to the homestead. I mean, we did tell him how to turn it off for that sort of circumstance, but, look, a slightly funny story, but it highlights, look, be aware of the vehicle and the technology that you've got, and make sure it's fit for your purpose and that you're comfortable with the technology in the vehicle.
That's a great story. I'm just visualising shifting mobs between our different farms and going, geez, how would I do that? I'll take this as a great sort of closing sort of question from Richard. And I think this is a really major issue that sort of pops up. And he's posed it as a comment. Our staff require training to effectively use the new safety technology we are purchasing. Some turn it off, e.g. lane departure, where they can. We have a job to do in educating staff. Is that about just for them, or should it be the vehicle people who sell it, or where should that sit, do you think?
Well, I think particularly the larger fleets, this is where larger fleets can influence this. If you're making a bulk purchase from one brand, for instance, tell that brand or make it a condition, you need to undertake some training. You need to run a training program for our staff. I'm sure they will do that if that means that they get the deal. So use that and leverage your influence to do things like that. I know one firm very aware of that they were ordering a whole new fleet of vans, and because it was a change, they'd moved out of utes into vans. That they'd done the right thing, and they said, look, we need some training. And they actually asked ANCAP, they said, who would you suggest we should get to teach our staff? And I said, well, you know what? The car manufacturer, the people who've just sold you all those vehicles, get them to do it. And that's, and that's what they ended up doing. So, look, training's important, and it's also about the confidence as well. That's also useful to get that feedback too. If the people using the vehicle say, hey, that system doesn't work quite well, that's useful feedback in particularly early days of technology to feedback to the manufacturer so that it's improved with the next versions. But yeah, training, like anything, is important, and too often we forget that the vehicle is actually the workplace for many people. So you wouldn't put in a new photocopier without training people. So why would you give people a new car without training them in what it might have?
I think that's a great point. I know how much the photocopier frustrates me. So thank you so much for your time today, James, coming in. We did have a lot of questions, so I do apologise for those who we did not get to. But I know as coming down, we had our pop-in guest for a brief moment. And for those of you who want to register for our news, we kept up to date around this webinar, future sort of ones coming up. Please go to the NRSP website. So thank you very much, James, for your time today.
Good. Thank you.